Hey guys, so we're looking at a video from Epimetheus today called Who Are the Philistines or Steins? I'm not sure which is the proper way to say it. In my head I always say it Philistines, but I've heard some people say Philistines, so I don't know. It's one of those things. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, I'm a Christian. I'm very devoted to my faith. I read my Bible daily. I go to church at least 2 times a week. So I'm telling you this because my familiarity, I always have trouble saying that word, but how I'm most familiar with the Philistines, Steins, is through the Bible. And they are a group of people that often pop up in the Bible, usually as a nemesis to the Hebrew slash, Israelite people, and usually always an antagonistic force. And I think the most famous Philistine is definitely Goliath, and the famed story of David versus Goliath. So that's basically how I'm most familiar with them. And overall, I have a I have a feeling that this video isn't gonna look into the Bible. I'm just assuming this is gonna try to be an unbiblical, untheological approach to trying to see the Philistines through a more secular lens, which will, assuming that my assumption is correct, will definitely be a new way to look at them. And a lot in the Bible, at least later on, to my knowledge, this group appeared very early on, like in the book of Genesis, with among the patriarchs, but later on they're more situated by the Mediterranean, more southwards by the Mediterranean coast, I think below the kingdoms of Israel slash Judah. So again, they were kind of renowned as an arch nemesis, or one of the many nemesises of Israel. So yeah, this will be very interesting. A new look. If he does go the secular route, I'd be surprised if he actually starts talking about the Bible. But and again, I believe everything in the Bible is true. I'm a full-on believer, but I understand that, I imagine most people, especially in this more secularized world that we live in, most people aren't. And so this will be a new light to look at a topic that I'm familiar with. And yeah, I probably should stop yapping. We should probably get to it. So if you want to watch the original video by Epimetheus, the link to this video is down in the description down below. And if you enjoy my content and want to help support me in any way, shape, or form, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and maybe consider being a YouTube or Patreon member. It would really help me out a lot. Now with that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let us watch Who Are the Philistines by Epimetheus.
Who were the Philistines? The short answer.
Yeah, I knew it. Oh, this is part one? Wait, give me a second. Never mind, sorry, I just need to look at that. Philistines. Yeah, I figured that was the more common way people say it. My way is probably weirder. Philistines. Yeah.
The Philistines were an ancient people who lived on the southeastern shore of the Mediterranean during the Late Bronze to Early Iron Age. Their civilization was centered around the Pentapolis, the 5 cities of the Philistines: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza.
Yeah, that's something I really like about the Bible, is that it often mentions, especially like around the time of like King David, mentioning around the 5 cities of the Philistines and how they would often form coalitions because they weren't all on the same page. Sometimes they would all have to unite like their individual kings in order to fight the enemy. I'm not trying to turn this into like a preachy Bible thing. This is the only commentary I can give because this is the only way I'm familiar with them, through the Bible. So I swear I'm not trying to turn this into a religious video. It's just, This is the only way I know about them, so I feel like it's either that or I'm just gonna not say anything, and that'd probably be more boring. But, yeah.
The land that this confederation of city-states inhabited is known as Philistia. The Philistines are most known for their role in the biblical narrative, where they are the longtime rival of the Hebrew tribes and their later kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of context. Long before Philistia was founded, the region was inhabited by the Canaanites. They were the indigenous people who lived along much of the eastern Mediterranean coast. The Canaanites were predominantly descended from the Neolithic farmers and city dwellers that had lived there long before written history began. Peoples from Mesopotamia and Anatolia also migrated and assimilated into the Canaanite population. Through conflict, migration, and trade, Mesopotamian culture was the most significant outside influence on the early Canaanite civilizations. That was followed by an increase in Egyptian influence, especially in southern Canaan. Egypt's first foothold in the region was a fortress built at the strategic choke point where Gaza would later be built. The site controlled the entry and exit point for the easiest but still very difficult land route to Egypt. During the Middle Kingdom period of Egypt's history, pharaohs campaigned in Canaan for the first time. They plundered cities, extracted tribute, and made trade agreements there. As Egypt exploited Canaan for its resources, many Canaanites had a thought. Hey, Egypt seems like a nice place to live right now. So many moved to Egypt. During the later Middle Kingdom, the mass migration of Canaanites to the Nile Delta seems to have been mostly peaceful, at least at first. Later, the Egyptian Middle Kingdom was overthrown by the Hyksos, a foreign group that was either completely made up of Canaanite newcomers, or, in large part, after a century of Hyksos domination of Egypt and rule in the Nile Delta, they were defeated and Egypt reunited. The new Egyptian kingdom that emerged was far more militaristic than any that had come before it. Their main foreign policy goal was to dominate Canaan. They were successful. Egyptian armies moved at will throughout Canaan. They built fortresses and removed uncooperative kings, who were replaced with more friendly and pro-Egyptian successors. In addition to creating a large buffer zone against invading enemies, control of Canaan also brought control of trade, which created a lucrative source of revenue for Egypt. During the 15th century BC, the city of Gaza was built as an Egyptian administrative and trade center, managed by an Egyptian royal governor. Egypt controlled Canaan for more than 3 centuries, although it did occasionally lose control and dealt with periodic rebellions. Despite the heavy-handed Egyptian rule, there were some benefits, especially for the southwestern coastal plain. For the hundreds of years the Egyptian Empire controlled the region, it was far from the front lines of Egypt's wars with neighboring empires to the north, like the Mitanni and Hittite empires. This allowed the region to focus on productivity and commerce. Numerous unwalled agricultural settlements and cities thrived there. The city of Ashdod became a commercial hub for producing and selling purple fabric and clothing. Ashkelon developed into a busy seaport, while all of southern Canaan became a bustling thoroughfare, as it was the last stop for merchants on both the busiest land and sea routes to Egypt. There, merchants could relax and stock up on some of the local Canaanite wine, filling any empty space they had in their ship or caravan before heading to Egypt, where they could exchange their various goods for gold. Mycenaean merchants from what is now Greece would have been among the most frequent visitors to southern coast.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know that it's mainly the Bronze Age, that like where the world was so interconnected, like the great civilizations of Egypt, Mycenaean Greece, the Hittites, and I find that such a unique time period that we've only really covered like really sparsely on this channel. But we covered the fall of, you know, the Bronze Age with the, you know, arrival of the sea peoples and the natural disasters and stuff like that. So we covered that with Historia Civilis's video, and it was really cool to see, because like just seeing how like connected the big powers of the world were around the Mediterranean is just such a unique, like, you know what I mean, situation it's almost like it's cool to see, but also tragic in a sense. It feels like a real like a zombie apocalypse kind of like vibe. You get me, with the fall of everything, and then Egypt was kind of like the last man standing. Um, as we know, Egypt was like one of the first like powerhouses of the world, and Egyptian culture was very prevalent, and they're like at their peak from like Syria all the way through a large part, and even past its peak, Egypt as like a, in terms of geography, remained ever prevalent in the world and among great empires who all kind of wanted it. So I don't know. I've been really fascinated the more we've touched on Egypt on this channel, and I really do want to learn more about Egypt and, you know, its influence, because like I said, it's like one of the first world superpowers, and like in the biblical account it kind of is treated like that, because Egypt was, in terms of culture and knowledge and stuff, was very advanced. Even to this day, some people praise the Egyptians and like have ideas about their you know, their structures, such as the pyramids, as a very advanced civilization and a very ancient one. Like the saying that Cleopatra, the last one before the Romans took, you know, Egypt, was closer to our time than she was to the founding of the pyramids. So there's just so much that has happened. It is as ancient as possible, and it's a civilization that still is around. So I don't know, it's really cool. Do I look Egyptian, guys? I gotta someone like sometimes people like guess my ethnicity and they get it really wrong. I've heard some people say I look Indian, others have said you look Egyptian, and I'm just like I don't know, guys. I'm sorry, that's a random question to ask, but it's something that's bugged me. I'm like, so just any group of people with darker skin, I just look like, apparently. I can just blend in. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think I look like? Sorry, random question, but back to the video.
Coastal Canaan. This is evidenced by the large numbers of Mycenaean pottery found in the region. At the beginning of the 12th century BC, southwestern Canaan was one small, prosperous component within a large, interconnected system of empires. And the good times were about to abruptly end.
Meet Billy. He just
Yeah, so I'm assuming he's gonna get into the Bronze Age collapse, and some people have said this is like where the Philistines, you know, kind of take stage, as they were. I've heard people propose that they were among, or the sea peoples, and that they were, you know, there. And yeah.
Chapter 3. The Bronze Age Collapse and the Rise of the Philistines. In the early 12th century BC, the old international order dramatically collapsed. In the span of a few decades, ancient empires were reduced to rubble. Prosperity gave way to desolation, and a golden age gave way to a dark one.
Yep, the Dark Age, which is all, literally, the majority of civilization, the most powerful civilizations, all fell. Like, I mean, most of them fell. But you know what I mean, right? That's kind of terrifying. Egypt was one of the ones to continue, but they were crippled. Like, they were in, like, you get me? Like, from what they were to this, they did not come out of that unscathed. It is terrifying, just the fall of several civilizations like that. Like, that's like, yeah, that's like the end of the world for so many people's perspectives, you know what I mean?
Devastating event had many causes, including, but not limited to, drought, famine, disease, civil unrest, and region-wide prolonged imperial conflicts. But by far the most dramatic, enigmatic, and emblematic contributing factor to the collapse was the mysterious maritime piratical band of apocalyptic marauders known as the Sea Peoples. They left a swath of destruction along the coast of the eastern Mediterranean, which culminated in the failed invasion of Egypt. In their final assault on the Nile Delta, one of the Sea Peoples, called the Peliset, appear to have been the most numerous, based on how many times they are mentioned in inscriptions.
This famous battle of depicting the Egyptians' victory over the the, sea peoples. And again, the sea peoples, like I said, this gives me like a zombie apocalypse vibe. Except, instead of undead people, it's just random strangers, but you get what I mean, right? Just a bunch of random people from over the seas. You don't know where they came from, and they're just attacking everybody and like signaling the end of like the Bronze Age as the world order forever change. It is really epic, you know what I mean?
The frequency they are depicted on temple wall reliefs. After the Egyptian victory, Ramses III stated that he resettled captured Peliset prisoners of war in southwestern Canaan. The Peliset were garrisoned in fortresses, bound in the pharaoh's name. The intended goal was that the Peliset would guard Egypt's northeastern border. There, the descendants of the Peliset became the Philistines. Chapter 4. Where did the Peliset come from? And what happened to the Canaanites who were living in southwestern Canaan?
Yeah, very good questions. And it's really cool because, like I said, with the biblical account, the Philistines are just there. There's no origin story like this, like that. They're just kind of they show up because again, the Bible follows mainly the Hebrew/Israelites. They're the main character, and then basically whoever randomly pops up to confront them will be mentioned in the narrative. But the way the Bible is written, especially the earlier books, is very blunt and straight to the point. Like, oh yes, then Israel did this, and they went and did that, and then this group, the Amalekites, and then the Edomites, and then the Philistines, and then the Amorites. Like you know what I mean? They just throw all these things at you. Like, we don't really, just groups kind of more already there to challenge Israel. So it's really interesting, I have to say. And there have been ideas of where the sea peoples came from. Some said like Europe or around there, or Sicily, I think was a big, proposed one. Just migrating. I think one of the theories was to escape from volcanic activity or something. I could be wrong. It's been a while since we watched Historia Civilis's Bronze Age collapse video, but something like that.
Before 3 decades before the final Sea People's assault on the Nile Delta, the pharaoh Merneptah also defeated a major Sea People's coalition, which did not include the Peliset. Around the same time, Merneptah also campaigned with his army in Canaan. There, he mentions the sack of 3 rebellious cities, including Ashkelon, which was one of the leading Canaanite cities of the time. Interestingly, he also makes the claim that during his campaign in Canaan, Israel is laid waste, and his seed is not. Although apparently exaggerating, this is significant, because the Merneptah inscription is the oldest written artifact mentioning Israel, which is not mentioned as a city, country, or region, but as a foreign people group, as signified by the hieroglyphic determinative of a throw stick beside male and female seated figures. Although Merneptah may have also slightly exaggerated when he stated that Canaan has been plundered into every sort of woe. It is safe to say that at least some of Canaan was not in great shape after Merneptah's campaign. From the archaeological record, it is apparent that almost all of the cities, towns, hamlets, and small settlements on the southwestern coastal plain were destroyed immediately before, during, or after the first decades of the 12th century BC. So what happened to the Canaanites of the coastal plain? Well, most of them died. But it should be strongly emphasized that not all of them died. And even though only a small percentage of the earlier dense population of the coastal plain survived, they were still more numerous than the newly arrived Peliset. The vast majority of scholars today believe that the Peliset originated somewhere around the Aegean Sea, with the island of Crete being the most popular option, but more on that later. Chapter 5. Settlement.
Crete, huh? That's interesting. That would be... Okay, that's interesting.
Modern estimates for the Peliset population at the time of their settlement in Canaan range anywhere from only a few thousand to a little more than 10,000 settlers. In contrast, Ramses claims to have captured and resettled hundreds of thousands. As with many things that concern the Philistines, There's a great deal of scholarly disagreement concerning Ramses III's claim to have resettled the captured Peliset in his strongholds. The traditional view is that these strongholds evolved into the 5 cities of the Philistines. There is some evidence to support this, like at Ashkelon, where resettlement began on the ruins of the Egyptian fort there. This could also fit in the scenario where the Peliset were the ones that destroyed the fort. Or the fort could have been destroyed during Merneptah's campaign in Canaan, when he sacked Ashkelon, and the Peliset later reoccupied the abandoned ruin. Because the 5 cities of the Philistines were situated along the road of Horus, which was vital to Egypt's military and economic success, it has been called into question whether Egypt voluntarily resettled the Peliset in such a precarious position. Some have hypothesized that the Peliset either conquered southern Canaan not long before or after their assault on the Nile Delta, and Egypt just lied and claimed that's all part of the plan.
You know, there is a famous battle with Ramses the Great that there's art depicting. I forgot what the battle was, but it was a really great battle. And apparently there's, I heard that that battle wasn't actually a success. I'm not sure if it was against the Hittites or not. I forgot the group, but point is, Ramses the Great had a battle that apparently, according to evidence, that despite how much he paraded how great his victory was and made images and whatnot to it, it was actually more of a draw and not a decisive victory, but he used propaganda to inflate it. I forgot what the battle is called, and I think it's the Hittites, but I could be wrong about that too, but either way. So, I bring that up because it wouldn't surprise me if there's room for embellishment, and considering, that's kind of the problem, huh? Because sometimes, like, okay, this is the only source we have to an event, and we don't even know if the people who are, like, telling it were using it as propaganda, right? Like, you just have to kind of just go with it, because we don't have any other source. So, yeah, that's kind of a big problem with history a lot of the times.
However, it is unlikely that Egypt would try to get away with such a blatant lie. It is more likely that they just tried to stretch the truth a little bit. Another possibility is that a bankrupt and war-weary Egypt negotiated a truce with the surviving Peliset. If both were not strong enough to benefit from continuing to fight, perhaps, in return for captured prisoners of war, the Peliset would pay a token tribute to Egypt and accept the status of being an Egyptian vassal. If such an agreement took place, both parties received the benefit of recognition and legitimacy. This made Egypt falsely appear stronger and more stable, while the Philistines received the prestige and legitimacy that came along with being the agent of the empire that had controlled Canaan for centuries. Again, if such a negotiation or something similar took place, then most that heard Ramses III's lofty boasts probably believed them, because it wasn't so far off from the truth or the word on the street. In addition to possibly negotiating with the Egyptians, the Peliset almost certainly successfully negotiated with the Canaanite survivors. From what has been excavated so far at the Philistine sites, it is abundantly clear that in addition to a new foreign element in the material culture, a local Canaanite population was an integral part of every Philistine settlement from its emergence. The current general consensus is that at least 50% of the early population at these sites were Canaanites. It is possible that the Philistine settlements were established under Egyptian supervision or encouragement. However, given Egypt's internal turmoil and economic woes in the 12th century BC, their involvement was likely minimal at best, if at all. After their failed assault on Egypt, another one of the Sea Peoples, the Tejeker, established themselves at the city of Dor, which they used as a base for their piratical operations for over a century. Some of the Tejeker that the Egyptians captured also seem to have been settled in what became the Philistine cities. Because the Peliset were formidable warriors, they would have been able to offer protection to some of the Canaanite survivors of the coastal plain. In return, they would have benefited from the extra manpower and the local knowledge of their new homeland. In the Egyptian depiction of the Battle of the Delta, there are a few ox carts shown with women and children inside. So it appears there would have at least been some females and a few whole families that arrived with the Peliset. However, given the turbulent times and the great distance traveled, it is likely that a disproportionate number of the Peliset were adult males. Consequently, When the Peliset initially settled in Canaan, finding wives was probably a top priority after survival, which would have motivated them to negotiate with and incorporate anyone who had extra daughters. The speed that both Peliset and Canaanite cultures joined together to become a new Philistine culture is remarkable. This was undoubtedly
That's really cool. So that's what I was thinking. It seems like a hodgepodge of, groups coming around and then, kind of bringing into existence the Philistines. So that's actually really cool to see, like all these groups that pre-existed, and then all these migrating groups just kind of meeting here, and then just that's really interesting.
expedited out of necessity. But another likely factor that aided the two peoples joining together so quickly was that they already knew each other well. Chapter 6. The Aegean Connection. For centuries, merchants from the Aegean had been traveling to southern Canaan. Because of this, there were likely some Canaanite survivors that were able to communicate in the Peliset language and were familiar with their cultural customs, and vice versa as well. Almost every time in history there are long-term commercial
Alright, so that's cool, because he established the earlier connection around the Canaanite cities where people would stop there and then go to Egypt. So this actually kind of worked out in their favor in the long run, because it's like, oh wait, so many people showed up here that we were so familiar with their customs, their language, their culture. So when these random people show up, like, possibly already knew them, and so everything was chill. Okay, it's all coming together.
Contacts between two peoples. There is also intermarriage. It is very possible that prior to the Bronze Age collapse, there was already a small hybrid Aegean and Canaanite community and culture in the region. The survivors from this community may have sped up the assimilation process between the two larger groups. One of the most solid pieces of evidence that suggests at least a partial Aegean ancestry for the Philistines is their pottery. The striking similarity between Mycenaean pottery from the Aegean and Philistine pottery in form, style, and decoration is unmistakable. In some pieces, the only way to detect a difference is that the Philistine pottery is made from local clay and not from Aegean clay. This piece of evidence on its own is not conclusive. Some have argued in the near post-apocalyptic aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, the surviving Canaanites missed the Aegean pottery they used to import so much that they began to manufacture an imitation of it locally, which is possible, but unlikely. In addition to fascinating pottery fragments, Philistine architecture also had some elements that suggest an Aegean origin. While earlier Canaanite homes cooked their food in closed ovens, Philistine homes cooked their meals over a centrally placed open circular hearth in the same manner as Aegean homes. What the Philistines ate, again, suggests an Aegean origin. While digging through ancient Philistine garbage piles, archaeologists have discovered an unusually large amount of pig bones. The type of pig was not previously native to the Levant, but it was a native of the Aegean. In contrast to cows, sheep, and other livestock, pigs do quite well at sea. They are hardy, low maintenance, and great at cleaning up any biological waste all over the ship.
That's interesting. Okay, I could see why the idea... Either this or this is the greatest, coincidence in, human history. But, yeah, I could see why this is a pretty... Yeah, I could see why this theory would catch on. It's plausible. It sounds plausible to me, at least.
The many Philistine pork dinners may be directly related to their nautical origin as sea peoples. Or, the swine could have been imported not long before the Bronze Age collapse, but it is another piece of evidence that points towards an Aegean connection.
This may be the last ad you ever...
The clothing, arms, and armor of the Peliset also suggest but do not confirm an Aegean origin, like their iconic headgear. While helmets like these were used in the Aegean, similar helmets were first used in Mesopotamia. As they slowly went out of style in the east, they became fashionable in the west.
Yeah, these helmets look like Bart Simpson hair. You know what I mean? Like, on the side, it looks like a mohawk. But, yeah. Old armor was so unique. in a lot of cultures. That's actually one of my favorite parts of looking in the past history, because it's just cool to see how people like would dress up. Like Mycenaean Greeks look like tin cans, like golden tin cans, when they fought. If you look at like the Iliad historical armor that the Greeks would have actually worn instead of like the classical Spartan design Corinth helmets thing. So I don't know. It's really cool. But yeah, this looks like I'm gonna call it the Bart Simpson helm because it really does kind of look like that.
One theory about the Peliset is that they were members of a mercenary warrior cult, as similar headgear was most often depicted on gods or priests. According to the biblical account, a tribe of Canaanites called the Avites lived on the southern coastal plain before the Philistines arrived from Caphtor. The Avites are later listed as living among the Philistines. Most scholars identify Caphtor as Crete, but Caria, Cilicia, and Cyprus are also popular options. Cyprus has a compelling case for being the homeland or the last stop for the Peliset before coming to Canaan. Like southern Canaan, Cyprus was a long-time trading partner of the Mycenaeans, who would have been very familiar with the island. In times of danger, people often flee to somewhere familiar. During and after the collapse of the Kingdom of Wallachia, many Mycenaeans fled their own collapsing society to live on Cyprus. Mycenaeans, Cypriots, or a combination of both might have been one and the same with the Peliset, and maybe one or the other was the Chijeker. Criticism of the Aegean connection. Two of the best arguments that the Peliset were not from the Aegean region is that there is no clear evidence of Aegean influence on Philistine language or religion. The gods that the Philistines worshipped, Baal, Astaroth, and Dagon, were already worshipped in Canaan before the arrival of the Peliset. One obvious answer to why the Peliset abandoned their old, possibly Greek gods is that they lived through the traumatic collapse of their own civilization, and then they suffered the humiliation of defeat at the hands of the Egyptians. Some would have been made slaves, their most beautiful women taken as trophies, and even more would have died along the way or in battle. The tiny group of survivors just likely lost faith in the gods of their fathers. Additionally, many ancient peoples viewed gods as being tied to a specific geographic territory, so they may have just believed that their...
Yeah, that's interesting, because if I can bring in the biblical connection here, there are times in the Bible where foreign powers would face off, and then like they would be like, we can't fight in the hills, their gods are the gods of mountains, so we must fight in the valley because our gods are the gods of the valley. Like it's an interesting thing that I had been reading, because I'm like reading through the Book of Kings and stuff right now, and that actually was a point in facing off. Like people took that into account, at least in that biblical narrative. Like, okay, their gods are gods of mountains, therefore we don't fight them on mountains, or their god doesn't have domain over the valley, so we would be better off fighting there. Like, it's interesting. Like I'm thinking of that right now. So, yeah, gods being tied to geographic things or to certain things done is something really I got kind of brought to my mind,
Their old gods had no power in the land they settled in. As for the language, this could be explained by 1. We know very little of the Philistine language, so maybe there was some words that linked to Mycenaean Greek, Luwian, or another Aegean language, but we just don't know about it. 2. The Peliset saw the advantage of mastering the Canaanite language, which some of them probably already knew, so they could negotiate better. 3. While the Philistine men farmed their fields, drank wine with their friends, and waged war on their enemies, Philistine women, many of whom were probably of Canaanite origin, taught their children to speak and worship the Canaanite gods. Most other theories not mentioned here heavily or completely rely on linguistic similarities to place names and the Peliset. Out of the many possible homelands for the Peliset, somewhere near the Aegean fits best, given the current evidence. Following the collapse of the Bronze Age empires, a complete restructuring of society took place. Nomads moved into the ruins of cities, and some surviving city dwellers took on a nomadic way of life. While in most areas of the Near East, a nomadic pastoralist lifestyle became the most common, one of the few places where urban life recovered and thrived was along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. For centuries, heavy-handed imperial administrations regulated and taxed the flow of trade that went through Canaan. Following the Bronze Age collapse, independent city-states became the leading traders, as Egypt gradually abandoned the region in the 12th century BC. Even though at first there was only a small trickle of trade flowing through the region, compared to the traffic of earlier times, it was more profitable for small independent traders, like the Philistines. Their fortified settlements rapidly expanded into cities, and their soldiers filled the power vacuum left by the Egyptians on the coastal plain. All of the Philistine cities were situated close to some of the best farmland in the region. In contrast to earlier Canaanite cities, where the farming communities that supported the city were spread out over a large area, Philistine farmers lived in the city, and their cultivated land was nearby. This city plan reflected the times, where marauders and invaders were a much more likely occurrence, and protecting farmers was a higher priority. The Philistines were an industrious people. Not only did they tax trade going to Egypt, they produced large amounts of wine and olive oil for export. Ekron, which was a small settlement during Canaanite times, developed into a large production center for olive oil. At Ekron, 115 large olive oil presses have been excavated, which would have produced many tons more of olive oil than they could have needed for personal consumption. By the beginning of the 11th century BC, Philistia was one of the most rapidly recovering regions in the entire Near East, while most other regions were still in turmoil. Although over time there were a few other Philistine settlements and cities, political and economic power was concentrated in the Pentapolis. The League of City-States was governed by a council of 5 lords. They gathered to deliberate on matters where collective action might be necessary. For most of the 11th century BC, the Philistines dominated the entire Canaanite coastal plain. According to the biblical account, the Philistines were able to defeat and vassalize the Hebrew tribes to their north and east multiple times, in one instance for 40 years. This was partially due to the Philistines' technological advantage. They had chariots which were very effective on the flat coastal plain, but not so much in the hills. And they enjoyed an early monopoly on iron weapons in the region. Iron armor and weapons would have been a significant advantage over the bronze armor and weapons used by the Hebrews and the other people in the region. One of the major motivating factors for the Philistines to expand their territory eastwards would have been the control of trade routes. In addition to the sea route, if the Philistines controlled all the major land routes going to Egypt, they could charge significantly higher tariffs. Philistine aggression and expansionist aspirations probably played a role in the Hebrew tribes uniting into a kingdom. According to the book of Samuel, Israel's first king Saul was killed in battle against the Philistines. Before Saul's death, his successor David, famous for killing a large fellow from Gath, fled Saul and lived in Gath. There he worked as a mercenary for the Philistines. Interestingly, after becoming king, David had 600 Philistines from Gath in his personal retinue, in addition to some Cherethites and some Pelethites, who some think are a subset of Philistines. When David's son rebelled, and he had to flee Jerusalem, his Philistine soldiers were some of the few that remained loyal to him. Even though the Philistines are most well known for being the frequent antagonists in many of the Bible's most intense...
Yep. I'm really happy that he's touching on the Bible, because like I said, I'm familiar with all this because I read the Bible daily, and obviously I believe in the Bible. I'm a Christian. I believe everything that's written in there is true, and that's how I view it. And obviously, a lot in this very secular world, people are like, I don't believe in the Bible or what it's written in it. I want, they would say, I want a secular look of this, which basically means ignoring the Bible. And I get that, not a lot of people believe in it. And that's what I assumed this video was going to be, a very, out of the Bible thing. But I am happy that he is touching on it. And, the area that I'm way more familiar, though I do like the non-biblical look as well. I think it's definitely very helpful.
Narratives. The many, not as exciting instances of cooperation, collaboration, and somewhat peaceful coexistence are often overlooked. Intermarriage between the two groups is mentioned as being common. And in contrast to most of the other Canaanites, intermarriage with the Philistines was not outright banned, although it was frowned upon.
Hey, I'm Jordan.
Yeah, there were there were laws about intermarriage stuff with the Jewish people, and basically the Hebrews were like, oh yeah, don't marry outside. But in the Bible, breaking those laws were pretty common if you read like the book of Judges through Kings. Just people would do that and then God would get angry, and then the biblical account of why Israel would be conquered by neighbors such as the Philistines or outside forces is because God was angry with them and he would let them be conquered. Which, I guess in a theological perspective, the reason empires and kingdoms can be conquered is because God lets it happen. Which makes sense, you know? At least with Israel and specifically, every time that they get overwhelmed by an enemy or become free from an outside influence, it's because either they've upset God or they're right with God. So I don't know, that kind of like in a theological perspective changes the way I view things. Like obviously in this channel we don't really touch on that, but like I'm thinking like, man, you know, to some degree God lets things happen for reasons, you know.
Around the early 10th century, Philistine territory shrank to around its core region. The loss of the port of Joppa was a major blow to the Philistines. This allowed merchants to easily bypass the Philistine coast on their way to Egypt, including the Canaanites to the north who were allied with the Hebrews. Today, these Canaanites are more commonly known by their Greek name, Phoenicians. Their commercial ascendancy coincided with a slow Philistine economic decline. The 10th century BC also saw the split between Israel and Judah, and a short-lived but triumphant return of Egypt under the Libyan pharaoh Shoshenq. He sacked cities and collected tribute throughout Canaan before returning to Egypt with a large caravan full of loot. A few decades later, at the beginning of the 9th century BC, the Aramean king, Hazael of Damascus, successfully campaigned against Israel, Judah.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be seeing this because, like I said, I recently have been reading the Book of Kings in the Bible, and if you're into, like, that Game of Thrones stuff, like, constant assassinations, court intrigue, overthrows, you should just read the books of the Bible called Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, because it is full of that. The amount of people turning on each other, assassinating each other, it would amaze you. Like, I'm not joking. Basically, that's like the Bible's Game of Thrones right there. It's amazing. Yeah. Also, the Bible gives Hazael an origin story, which is really cool. That, you know, he assassinated the previous king, and that the prophet, like, Elisha, basically told him to his face, yeah, you're gonna be the king of Syria. And, you know, all that. It's really cool. Yeah, and the splitting of the kingdom, which again is something that God ordained in the Bible because of Solomon, David's son, and him turning away from God to go worship, like, you know, other gods that weren't, you know, the big capital G God. And also having like 1,000 women he was sleeping with. So, yeah, that's another wild thing that happened.
And Philistia, where he destroyed the city of Gath, which never fully recovered afterwards and became a dependency of Ashdod. Over the next century, Philistia gradually recovered, and then the Judeans successfully besieged Ashdod and Gath and destroyed their city walls. And then the Assyrians showed up. They destroyed the kingdom of Israel and made Judah a tributary. In the later 8th century, Assyria took the Philistine cities one by one. Puppet states were set up at Ekron, Ashkelon, and Gaza. Ashdod became a fully incorporated Assyrian province, while Gath became a backwater. Under Assyrian rule, Philistia had a much better 7th century than its 8th. As Assyria controlled the whole region, Philistia got down to business and did well. That is, until the very end of the 7th century. As the Assyrian Empire was beginning to fall apart, Gaza sought to assert its independence. Then Egypt, which was trying to assert its loyalty to Assyria, sacked Gaza. Then the Babylonian Empire that superseded the Assyrian invaded Philistia. Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon destroyed Ekron and Ashdod. The port city of Ashkelon was the last to hold out against Nebuchadnezzar, before also being destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar deported some of the Philistine population to Babylon, This allowed the Phoenician Canaanites to come in and fill the void. Over the following centuries, the new amalgamated population that formed lost all of its Philistine characteristics, while the region was dominated by a series of empires. After unsuccessfully revolting against the Romans, Judea was renamed Palestine, after their old nemesis. The Philistines are often a footnote in other people's histories, so I wanted to do a little bit of a longer video, just focused on that.
That's true. A very underrated group of people that were around for quite a bit. So that was really cool to see. I really enjoyed this video. And I'm glad to have looked at this video that he kind of touched not only on the secular aspects, but on the biblical narrative, which makes me very happy that he did that. And yeah, Epimetheus has become quite one of my favorite historical YouTubers to enjoy. No one ever recommends videos from him in this channel. This is all me just going out of my way to watch his videos because I'm a fan of him. I'm becoming quite the fan. So yeah, guys, I'm gonna end the video right here, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.